At the edge of a quiet village, far away from the noise of people and the warmth of homes, there stood an old graveyard that everyone feared. The villagers believed that the place was cursed. For many years, strange stories had been told about it. Some people said they heard whispers coming from the graves late at night. Others claimed they saw shadows moving between the tombstones when no one was there. The graveyard was surrounded by broken iron fences and tall, dry trees whose branches looked like twisted hands in the moonlight. During the day, the place looked abandoned and silent, but after sunset, the atmosphere changed completely. A cold wind always seemed to pass through the graves, making the old trees creak and groan as if they were alive. No one in the village dared to walk near the graveyard after midnight. Even the bravest villagers avoided the road that passed beside it. They believed that the spirits of the dead did not rest peacefully there. According to an old legend, many years ago a mysterious tragedy happened in that graveyard, and since then the souls buried there had never found peace. One night, under a pale full moon, the graveyard looked darker and more frightening than ever. Thick fog slowly spread across the ground, covering the graves like a ghostly blanket. The rusty gate moved slightly with the wind, making a long, eerie creaking sound that echoed in the silence. It felt as if something inside the graveyard was awake, watching and waiting. And that night, someone was about to enter the graveyard, unaware that the terrifying truth hidden there would soon be revealed. Ghost Crescent Moon. The rumors about the old graveyard had frightened the villagers for years, but not everyone believed them. A group of 4 teenage friends, Ali, Hassan, Bilal, and Saad, often laughed at the stories. They believed the villagers were simply scared of darkness and imagination. One evening, while they were sitting together near a small tea stall, the conversation once again turned toward the graveyard at the edge of the village. An old man nearby warned them, "No one should go there after midnight. Some places are not meant for the living." But instead of feeling scared, the boys became curious. Ali smiled and said, "Ghosts don't exist. These are just old stories people made to scare children." The others agreed, though Saad seemed slightly unsure. Bilal suddenly suggested something daring. "If we really want to prove everyone wrong, we should go there tonight." The idea made the group excited and nervous at the same time. Hassan laughed and said, "Yes, let's go at midnight. Then we'll know the truth." For a moment, Saad stayed quiet. He remembered hearing strange sounds once while passing near the graveyard during the evening. But he didn't want his friends to think he was afraid. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, let's go." Later that night, the village slowly fell silent. Lights in the houses turned off one by one, and the narrow streets became empty. A pale moon rose in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. At exactly midnight, the 4 friends quietly met near the road that led to the graveyard. They carried a flashlight and their phones, laughing nervously as they walked. None of them realized that their decision would soon lead them into a night of fear they would never forget. Ghost Crescent Moon. The narrow dirt road leading to the graveyard was silent and empty as the 4 friends slowly walked forward. The pale moonlight barely lit their path, and the cold night air felt heavier the closer they got. In the distance, the dark shapes of crooked trees surrounded the graveyard like silent guards protecting something hidden inside. Ali pushed the rusty iron gate, and it opened with a long, painful creak that echoed through the quiet night. The sound made Saad shiver. "That sound alone is enough to scare someone," he whispered nervously. Bilal laughed, trying to stay brave. "It's just an old gate. Relax." As they stepped inside, the atmosphere immediately felt different. The air was colder, and the silence was deeper than outside. Rows of old gravestones stretched across the ground, many of them broken or covered with moss. Some graves looked so old that the names on them could barely be read. A sudden gust of wind passed through the graveyard, making the dry tree branches sway and scrape against each other. The sound was strange, almost like quiet whispering voices. Hassan pointed his flashlight around nervously. The beam of light moved across the graves, creating long dancing shadows that made it seem like something was moving between the tombstones. "Did you hear that?" Saad suddenly asked. Everyone stopped walking. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the wind blew again, and the branches creaked loudly above them. Ali forced a smile. "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice was less confident now. As they walked deeper into the graveyard, The fog slowly began forming near the ground, spreading between the graves. None of them noticed that behind them, near the entrance gate, a shadow slowly moved. Ghost fog. The four friends continued walking deeper into the graveyard, their footsteps crunching softly on the dry ground. The fog around the graves was getting thicker, slowly crawling over the earth like a living thing. The beam from Hassan's flashlight shook slightly as his hands trembled. Ali tried to act brave. See? Nothing scary here. Just old graves and trees. But before anyone could respond, Bilal said a 2% voicer tool.com plus 20 discover more noise-canceling headphones convert text-speech voice synthesis service professional microphone equip. Lifelike Voice Library your generated audio's free text to speech with full access conversions. NLY stopped walking. Wait, look at that, he whispered. Everyone turned toward the direction he was pointing. A few steps away from them was an old grave covered in cracked stone. At first it looked normal, but then they noticed something strange. The soil on top of the grave was moving. Very slowly. The dirt began to shift as if something underneath it was pushing upward. Saad's eyes widened. Did you see that? He said in a shaky voice. Hassan quickly pointed the flashlight directly at the grave. The light revealed the soil rising and falling slightly, as if something was breathing beneath it. For a moment, no one spoke. Ali swallowed nervously. Maybe it's just an animal under the ground. Suddenly the dirt moved again, this time more strongly. A small crack appeared in the soil. Bilal took a step back. Animals don't move graves like that. The cold wind suddenly became stronger, whistling through the trees. The branches above them shook violently, and dry leaves began swirling around their feet. Saad's heart started beating faster. I think we should leave, he said quietly. But before anyone could move, the dirt on the grave shifted once more, even harder this time. It looked as if something beneath the grave was trying to come out. And whatever it was getting closer to the surface. Ghost crescent moon. The friends slowly stepped away from the strange grave, their eyes still fixed on the moving soil. The wind continued blowing through the graveyard, carrying a chilling silence that made their hearts beat faster. Let's just leave, Saad whispered nervously. Something isn't right here. Before anyone could respond, the old lamp near the graveyard entrance suddenly flickered. Its weak yellow light blinked on and off, casting strange moving shadows across the graves. Click, flicker, darkness, light again. The sudden change in lighting made the graveyard look even more terrifying. Every gravestone now cast a long shadow that stretched across the ground like dark hands reaching out. Hassan turned his flashlight toward the entrance. Was that light already doing that before? No, Bilal replied quietly. It was normal when we came in. The lamp flickered again, this time faster. The shadows of the crooked trees twisted across the graves in unnatural shapes, making it look like something was crawling between them. For a brief moment, Ali thought he saw a shadow move behind a tombstone. Did someone just move there? He asked suddenly. Everyone froze. They all looked in the same direction, but there was nothing there except rows of silent graves and drifting fog. It's just the light playing tricks on your eyes, Hassan said, though he didn't sound very sure. Then the lamp flickered violently again. For a second, the entire graveyard went completely dark. When the light came back, the shadows had changed. Some of them no longer looked like gravestones. They looked like tall figures standing silently among the graves. And slowly, one of the shadows began to move. Ghost fog. The strange moving shadows made the boys freeze in fear. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. The weak yellow lamp continued flickering, and the fog moved slowly between the graves like silent ghosts. Ali tried to stay calm. It's just shadows, he said, though his voice was quieter now. They slowly started walking again, hoping to reach the gate and leave the graveyard as quickly as possible. Hassan walked in front, pointing the flashlight toward the ground while the others followed closely behind. Suddenly, Saad felt something cold brush against the back of his neck. He quickly turned around. There was nothing behind him except fog and silent gravestones. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and continued walking. Then it happened again. This time, he clearly felt something touch his shoulder, a cold, heavy hand resting there for a brief moment. Saad gasped and spun around in panic. Who touched me? The others stopped and looked at him with confusion. Relax, Bilal said. None of us touched you. Saad's face had turned pale. I'm serious. Someone just put their hand on my shoulder. Ollie shined the flashlight around them. The beam moved across the graves, the trees, and the fog, but there was no one there. The graveyard was completely empty. A cold silence filled the air again. Maybe you imagined it, Hassan said nervously. Saad slowly turned forward again, trying to convince himself that it was just fear playing with his mind. But deep inside, he knew what he felt. That touch was real, and somewhere in the darkness behind them, something invisible was quietly walking with them. Ghost Crescent Moon. The boys continued moving through the graveyard, their steps now much faster than before. Fear had slowly replaced their earlier confidence. The cold air felt heavier, and the fog had grown thicker, covering the ground around the graves. Hassan kept shining the flashlight in different directions, trying to make sure nothing was following them. But every time the light moved across the graves, the shadows seemed to shift in strange ways. Suddenly Bilal stopped walking. "Wait, do you see that?" he whispered. The others turned toward the direction he was staring at. At first, they saw nothing but fog and rows of dark gravestones. Then slowly, through the mist, a shape began to appear. It looked like a tall, pale figure standing between two graves. The figure was completely still. Its body looked thin and unnatural, almost like a shadow that had taken human form. Long, pale clothing hung loosely from its body, moving slightly in the cold wind. Saad's heart began pounding loudly. Is that a person? Ollie pointed the flashlight toward the figure. The beam of light reached the spot. But strangely, the light didn't fully reveal the figure. It only made the pale shape clearer against the darkness. Then the figure slowly started moving. It began walking between the graves, its movements slow and unnatural, almost like it was floating rather than stepping. None of the boys dared to speak. They simply watched in silent terror as the pale figure moved deeper into the fog. Suddenly, the figure stopped. Very slowly, it turned its head toward them. Even from far away, they could feel its empty stare. And then, it began walking toward them. Ghost fog. The pale figure slowly moved toward them through the thick fog. Its steps were slow and unnatural, almost as if its feet were not touching the ground. The boys stood frozen in fear, unable to move or even speak. Ollie tightened his grip on the flashlight, trying to focus the beam directly on the figure. But the closer the light came, the stranger the shape looked. The fog around it seemed to move with it, hiding parts of its body. Who is that?" Hassan whispered. No one answered. The graveyard had become completely silent. Even the wind had stopped blowing. The figure suddenly stopped walking. For a moment, it stood perfectly still between the graves. The fog drifted slowly around it, making it look even more unreal. Then something impossible happened. The figure slowly faded. Right in front of their eyes, it disappeared. The boys stared at the empty space where it had been standing only seconds before. Bilal stepped back in shock. Where did it go? Saad quickly turned around, shining the flashlight behind them. The beam of light moved across rows of graves, but there was no sign of the strange figure. Then they heard it, a faint whisper. At first it sounded like the wind moving through the trees, but the air was completely still. The whisper came again, soft, slow, and very close. It sounded like someone was speaking right beside their ears, but the words were unclear. More whispers began rising from different directions, surrounding them from every side of the graveyard. The boys turned around in panic, trying to find the source. But there was no one there. Only graves, fog, and voices that did not belong to the living. Ghost Crescent Moon. The whispers grew louder around the boys, echoing through the graveyard like voices carried by an invisible wind. The sound came from every direction at once, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Saad covered his ears. Do you hear that? Yes, Hassan replied nervously, turning the flashlight around in panic. But I can't see anyone. The beam of light moved across the graves, the crooked trees, and the thick fog. Everything looked normal, yet the whispers continued. They sounded like many voices speaking at the same time in low, broken murmurs. Ollie tried to stay calm. Let's just leave. Now. They quickly started walking toward the entrance gate. But before they could go far, a loud cracking sound suddenly broke the silence. Crack. The boys stopped immediately. The sound had come from a nearby grave. Slowly, they turned toward it. The old gravestone standing above the grave began to shake slightly. Dust and small pieces of stone fell from its sides, as if something underneath was pushing against it. Did that just move? Bilal whispered. Before anyone could answer, the gravestone suddenly tilted forward. Then with a heavy crash, it fell to the ground. The sound echoed through the entire graveyard. The boys stared at the broken stone in horror. The grave beneath it looked disturbed, as if the earth had been pushed from inside. Saad stepped back slowly. Something pushed that. At that exact moment, the whispers suddenly stopped. The graveyard became completely silent again. Too silent. Then the soil inside the broken grave shifted slightly. It looked as if something beneath the earth had just moved, and whatever was inside was starting to wake up. Ghost fog. The moment the gravestone crashed to the ground, panic spread among the boys. None of them waited to see what would happen next. Run! Ollie shouted. All four of them turned and ran as fast as they could through the graveyard. Their feet pounded against the dry ground while the flashlight beam jumped wildly from side to side, lighting up crooked gravestones and twisted tree branches. The fog made it difficult to see clearly, and several times they almost tripped over old broken graves. Just reach the gate, Hassan yelled while running. They could already see the dark shape of the iron gate ahead of them. Relief began to fill their hearts as they got closer. But suddenly, bang! The heavy iron gate slammed shut on its own. The loud metallic sound echoed across the graveyard like thunder. The boys stopped running and stared at the closed gate in shock. That wasn't the wind, Saad said with fear in his voice. Ollie quickly ran to the gate and grabbed the rusty bars. He pulled hard, trying to open it, but the gate wouldn't move. It's locked, he shouted. Bilal and Hassan rushed to help him, pulling and pushing the heavy iron gate together. The metal rattled loudly, but it refused to open. Behind them, the graveyard had become strangely quiet again. Too quiet. Saad slowly turned around to look back into the darkness of the graves. The fog was thicker now, slowly moving between the tombstones. Then he noticed something terrifying. Several dark shapes were standing far away among the graves. They looked like tall figures, watching them. And slowly, those figures began moving closer. Ghost crescent moon. The boys kept struggling with the heavy iron gate, pulling and pushing with all their strength, but it refused to open. The rusty metal rattled loudly in the silent graveyard. It won't move, Ollie said, breathing heavily. Bilal stepped back, frustrated and scared. This is impossible. It was open when we came in. Behind them, Saad was still staring into the fog-covered graves. His heart was beating faster with every second. They're getting closer, he whispered. What? Hassan asked, turning around quickly. Saad slowly raised his trembling hand and pointed toward the graves. Through the thick fog, several tall, shadowy shapes were now visible. They stood between the tombstones like silent watchers. At first they were far away, but now they had moved closer. The boys stared in fear. The shapes didn't walk like normal people. Their movements were slow and unnatural, almost like they were gliding across the ground. Suddenly the fog shifted. From the middle of those shadows, a new figure appeared. This one looked different. It was the shape of an old man. His body was thin and slightly bent, and he wore what looked like old torn clothing that moved gently in the cold wind. But the most terrifying thing about him was his face. His eyes were hollow, dark, empty holes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The old figure slowly stepped forward from the fog. The boys stood frozen as he came closer. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. Finally, the old man stopped only a few meters away from them. Then slowly, he lifted his head, and his hollow, glowing eyes locked directly onto them. Ghost fog. The old figure stood silently in front of the boys, his hollow, glowing eyes staring directly into theirs. The fog slowly moved around his feet, and the cold air felt even heavier than before. None of the boys could move. It felt as if fear had frozen their bodies in place. Ollie's hands trembled as he slowly lowered the flashlight toward the ground. The weak beam of light now barely touched the old man's feet. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then the figure slowly tilted his head to one side. His movements were unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Saad felt his heart pounding so loudly that he thought everyone could hear it. Who are you? Hassan finally managed to whisper. The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly took another step forward. The fog shifted again, and now his face became slightly clearer in the dim light. His skin looked pale and lifeless, stretched tightly over his bones. Deep cracks and dark shadows covered parts of his face, making him look less like a human and more like something that had crawled out of the earth. Then suddenly, the old man opened his mouth. His voice came out low, dry, and cold. "This place," he paused for a moment, "is not for the living." The words echoed through the graveyard like a warning. The boys felt a wave of fear rush through their bodies. Behind the old man, the other shadowy figures were now standing completely still between the graves, watching, waiting. The old man slowly raised one thin hand and pointed toward the graves behind him. Then he spoke again, his voice even colder than before. "You should not have come here, Ghost Crescent Moon." The old man's cold words echoed through the graveyard, sending a wave of terror through the boys. The shadowy figures behind him remained still, silently watching them from between the graves. Saad suddenly felt dizzy. The fear, the whispers, and the strange events had become too much for him. I can't," he muttered weakly. Before anyone could react, Saad's legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. "Saad!" Hassan shouted, quickly kneeling beside him. Ali and Bilal rushed to help, trying to lift him up. His face had turned pale, and he wasn't responding. "Wake up! Saad, wake up!" Bilal said urgently, shaking his shoulder. But Saad didn't move. Meanwhile, the old man remained standing a few meters away, watching them without blinking. The fog continued swirling around him, making his figure look even more ghostly. Ali looked back at the gate desperately. "Forget everything else. We need to get out of here now." They quickly tried lifting Saad together while also pulling at the iron gate again. The metal bars rattled loudly as they pushed and pulled with all their strength. "Open! Come on, open!" Hassan yelled in panic. But the gate still refused to move. Behind them, the old man slowly raised his hand again. The shadowy figures between the graves began moving once more. Step by step, slowly coming closer. Ali's heart raced as he heard the faint sound of footsteps behind them. "Don't look back," he said nervously. "Just keep trying the gate." But the footsteps kept getting louder. Something was approaching them from the darkness. And they were trapped. Ghost fog. The sound of slow footsteps behind them grew louder with every second. The boys didn't dare to turn around. Fear had completely taken over their minds. Ali and Bilal kept pulling the iron gate with all their strength while Hassan tried to hold the unconscious Saad upright. "Please, open," Ali shouted desperately as the rusty metal rattled again. But the gate still refused to move. The footsteps behind them suddenly stopped. A heavy silence filled the graveyard. Slowly, very slowly, Hassan turned his head to look behind them. The old man and the shadowy figures had come much closer now. They stood only a short distance away, watching silently. Their shapes looked darker and more terrifying in the thick fog. Hassan's voice trembled. "They're right behind us." Just then, a powerful gust of wind suddenly rushed through the graveyard. The trees shook violently, and the fog swirled wildly across the ground. Dry leaves and dust filled the air, making it difficult to see anything clearly. The boys covered their faces as the wind roared around them. Then suddenly, clang! The iron gate behind them unlocked and slowly creaked open. Ali immediately turned and saw the gate moving. "It's open," he shouted. Without wasting a second, they lifted Saad together and ran through the gate as fast as they could. None of them looked back. They ran down the dark road, their hearts pounding wildly in their chests. After several minutes of running, they finally stopped far away from the graveyard. Breathing heavily, they slowly looked back. The graveyard gate was now closed again, and the fog had completely covered everything inside. Ghost Crescent Moon. The boys didn't sleep that night. After escaping the graveyard, they brought Saad back to the village and waited for him to wake up. Slowly, after some time, Saad finally opened his eyes. He looked confused and weak, but at least he was alive. None of them spoke much about what had happened. Every one of them had seen things they couldn't explain. The moving grave, the whispers, the shadowy figures, and the terrifying old man with hollow, glowing eyes. The next morning, curiosity and fear pulled them back to the graveyard. "We just need to check one thing," Ali said quietly. The sun was shining now, and the graveyard looked completely different. Without the darkness and fog, it seemed like an ordinary abandoned place. The broken iron gate stood slightly open, and the wind gently moved the dry grass. Slowly, the boys walked inside again. Everything was quiet. No whispers, no shadows, no strange figures. They carefully walked toward the area where they had seen the old man the night before. Then Hassan suddenly stopped. "Wait, look at this." The others stepped closer. In front of them was an old grave covered with cracked stone. The surface looked very old, and moss had grown around the edges. Ollie wiped some dust from the gravestone so they could read the name clearly. The moment they saw it, their blood ran cold. Carved into the stone was a name they all recognized. It was Saad's full name, and beneath it, the date of death was the same night they had entered the graveyard.